Our next speaker is Father Mike Eckley. Father Eckley is a native of Omaha and of Our Lady of Lourdes Parish and has been a priest for the Archdiocese for 27 years. Father Eckley is currently the pastor of St. Pius X and president of the Priest Council. He is also a board member of Mercy High School and Catholic Charities. Father was part of the visioning team that worked with Archbishop Lucas on the vision of the diocese and pastoral priorities, and was one of the point persons for the third priority, creating a culture where God's mercy can be experienced and lived. Please welcome Father Eckley.
Good evening. It is an honor to be here this evening. When I took a little break from the Sacrament of Reconciliation, went back into the sacristy for a few moments, I asked what time I was going to be speaking, and they said, well, right after the rosary, but Mass is at 5 o'clock, so be done by then. They said, whatever's on your heart to be able to share with us, though, at this point. I want to say that I was a little bit surprised about the invitation that I received to come here and speak this afternoon on this Divine Mercy Sunday. And the reason why I was a bit surprised is I've never been here before on Divine Mercy Sunday. As a pastor, many times we've had First Communions on this Sunday. And there has been a resistance, and I identify the resistance that's inside of me. There's something about this Sunday and the way that it has been framed that has kind of turned me away for a while. And as I reflected upon it and prepared for today, it reminded me of the experience that I had with Christians Encounter Christ when I was a young priest. When I had been ordained about 6 years, I was invited to do a CEC, a Christians Encounter Christ weekend. And I'd resisted for quite a while. I'd resisted even before that when people had invited me. Because I was involved with other retreat work. I was teaching high school during retreats for high school students, involved with TEC, which is Teens Encounter Christ. And I thought, well, if they want me to help out, I'll help out with it, but I don't see the reason why I should go through the weekend. But eventually I gave in and I said, okay, I'll go. But I was there, but I wasn't really there. I was just going through the motions, at least those first day and a half of the retreat. And I remember a time of quiet, a time of prayer, and I was sitting in prayer and thinking, you think you know everything. You think you have the answers. And because as the retreat was going on, I was going, okay, this is going to happen next. Even though they didn't tell me what was going to happen next, I said, okay, this is going to happen next. I've done enough retreats, I know what's going to happen next. And the Spirit just kind of on my heart said, why don't you shut up and listen for a little bit? And maybe you'll understand and maybe you'll learn something. And that's what I did. And the end of the retreat was much different than the first part of the retreat. Because there was an openness to listen. And I found myself this past week, as I've been preparing to be here this evening, thinking about what is it that the Lord desires to reveal. Not only to my heart, but each and every one of our hearts. I'll tell you, my resistance in the past has been, I didn't understand why within the octave of Easter, we went back to penance. After 40 days of penance, we can't even celebrate Easter Day without turning back to penance. Today is Easter Day. It is the octave of Easter. And we celebrate as we did last Sunday. Why do we turn back? And then as I was reading and preparing, I was reminded, we so often forget. We forget. And we forget about God's divine mercy. That it's important that we be reminded of it. During the Lenten season, and St. Pius X, where I'm pastor, we're reading the book Walking with Jesus, and they're reflections of the Holy Father, different talks that he has given. And a talk that he gave 4 years ago to the priest of Rome, he was talking about mercy. And he was talking about divine mercy and Divine Mercy Sunday. And one of the things that he said was when St. John Paul II canonized St. Faustina in the year 2000, that it was something that had begun at least 15 years before that in his prayer and in his heart. That there was something that he understood and started to develop, that recognition that we had a need as we entered into the new century, as we entered into the new millennium, that we needed to recall God's mercy. And that mercy is something so often we can forget. He says, as he speaks to the priest of Rome, even the magisterium forgets. They forget how important that divine mercy is. St. Faustina, in the visions that she had and the information she received in her prayer, came in between the wars, when the world was in need to hear of that mercy, was in need of that healing. And as John Paul spoke in his homily at the canonization, we don't know the road that is ahead of us. We know that there will be great strides in human endeavors, but there will also be great pain, and there'll be great suffering. And we need to be reminded of that divine mercy. And even as we encounter this mercy, and the way that we encounter this mercy most profoundly is through the sacrament of penance or confession or reconciliation. We encounter that love and that forgiveness of the Father, this love which is perfect. Because so often, as much as we strive and how much we desire to follow his will, we can turn away. We forget. And I take great comfort in the fact that even the apostles forgot. The gospel we're going to hear proclaimed at Mass on this second Sunday of Easter, this Sunday within the octave, this Divine Mercy Sunday, is a story of Jesus' appearing to his disciples and Thomas being absent. But then we hear that Jesus appears another time a week later, and this time Thomas is there. But John has another story. As we're told in the gospel, it's the third time that Jesus appears to his disciples. And what strikes me about it is that St. Peter forgot. Peter, who was there at the first appearance, who was there at the second appearance, who walked with the Lord, who heard his words, who saw his miracles, that Peter forgot. Read from John chapter 21. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to his disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. He revealed himself in this way. Together were Simon Peter, Thomas called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, Zebedee's sons, and 2 other of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." They said to him, "We also will come with you." So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. When it was already dawn, Jesus was standing on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, have you caught anything to eat?" They answered him, "No." So he said to them, "Cast the net over the right side of the boat, and you will find something." So they cast it, and were not able to pull it in because of the number of fish. So the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he tucked in his garment, for he was lightly clad, and jumped into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards, dragging the net of fish with them. When they climbed out on the shore, they saw a charcoal fire and fish on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you just caught." So Simon Peter went over and dragged the net ashore full of 153 large fish. Even though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come have breakfast." And none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they realized it was the Lord. Jesus came over and took the bread and gave it to them, in like manner the fish. This was now the third time Jesus was revealed to his disciples after being raised from the dead. The third time. And as I said, Peter was there, and here for the third one, he saw the other two. He received the gift of the Spirit just as we received the gift of the Spirit in baptism and had that gift sealed in confirmation for those of us who are confirmed. And he forgot, just as we forget at times. It tells us that Peter went fishing. This is not an insignificant fact or just something to kind of bring the story along. Peter went fishing. Peter had been called from the fishing boat. Peter had been invited, "Come, I will make you fishers of men." And after walking with Jesus, after seeing his miracles, after hearing his preaching, seeing his death, and seeing his risen form, Peter went back to the old way. Peter went fishing. And how often we forget, how often I forget, that I am forgiven. That I'm forgiven from the sins of my past, and I make amends and do my penance and desire to do better, and then I go back to some of those old ways and those old patterns. I go back fishing. The Lord's desire when he called Peter was to call him from his old way of life to a new way of life. And yet Peter went back to the old, to that which was comfortable. And we hear exactly what happens. They caught nothing. Nothing. But when the Lord was there, there was an abundance. The other thing I love about this story is Peter jumped out of the boat. He didn't even wait for the boat to get to shore. He left that old way of life. He jumped into the Sea of Tiberias, and he swam or he walked. I don't know how, it doesn't tell us how deep it was. But 100 yards away, he made his way to shore. And the idea is that he never went back. He remembered. And we're invited to remember. To remember that divine mercy that the Lord has for us. That he embraces us with that mercy. And he calls us to that new and that more abundant way of life. I am getting ready in a few months to move from my assignment to a new assignment. And there are a few articles that are essential. That when I move, I make sure that they're one of the first things that I pack and make sure that gets there safely, and then also one of the first things to be hung up. One of them is a crucifix. When my great-grandmother Treverdick died, she died just a few months before I was born. My mom, her oldest granddaughter. And so my mom received the crucifix that sat on top of the casket. And when I was born, it went over my crib. And it's been over my crib or my bed for the last 53 years. When I pack, I make sure that crucifix is with me. And I make sure it's one of the first things that gets put up in whatever new home or new place that I'm staying. But there's another thing that I have that's in my office, has been in my office now for about 15 years. And it's a poster. And it's a black and white picture. And it's a picture of an empty fishing boat sitting on a very calm sea. It was a gift that I received when I left St. Patrick's in Battle Creek, the first place that I was pastor. One of the parishioners, he asked me, he said, "I want to get you something special. What could I give you?" And I said, "I want a picture of an empty fishing boat, because I want to look at it every day and be reminded that I need to keep that boat empty, that every day I'm called to something new, something greater, something in the fullness of life that Christ gives us through his mercy, and not go back to the old." It doesn't always work, I forget, as we all forget at times. But to have that visible reminder, when I sit at my desk in my office, it is straight across from me. And so every day I see that constant reminder to leave the old. But I believe one of the ways that we can remember is to recall especially those times in our life that we know and we felt the Lord truly close to us. Elsewhere in this book, Walking with Jesus, Pope Francis speaks, in speaking to priests, about the sacrament of reconciliation, talking about we can't be good confessors unless we recognize and have experienced that love of God. To be present to the penitent who comes, to have experienced God being present to us, and to speaking those words of love and mercy to us. And I think it's true for each and every one of us. The way that we remember is we recall those times, those moments when the Lord was so close to us, holding us, embracing us, offering us his mercy. And when we do that, it helps us to remember so that when we do forget or we feel distance from the Lord, we can recall those moments. One of the moments for me of feeling the Lord look to me with that love came years ago when I was an associate in Fremont. I was there's 4 of us priests there at the time. And it was a busy place. With a school, I was teaching, I was coaching, associate pastor. I was sharing with someone this morning, one year I had 32 weddings, I had 26 funerals. I had the RCIA liturgy committee. My days were very full. And every weekend, one of us priests were on call. And this was a weekend that I was on call, which meant I had the Saturday evening Mass, and I had the late Sunday Mass, and I had the baptisms, and I had the Sunday evening Mass. And I was at a point where I was kind of feeling burnt out. Not sure I wanted to stay a priest. Thinking maybe this really wasn't a good idea. And I had the morning, that Sunday morning being on call, I got called early in the morning. Needed to open up the rectory for people to come in to sell script. Answering questions, people coming to the door with different needs between masses. I got called up to the hospital to anoint someone. I celebrated that late Sunday morning Mass, celebrated the baptisms. And then after the baptisms, I was setting up for another priest to come in later. And where the baptismal font was kept was in our Eucharistic chapel. And I went into the front pew of the chapel and I collapsed into the pew before the Blessed Sacrament. And I was overcome with the presence of the Lord. I'd never before, and really never since at this level, sensed the Lord being present to me. And it wasn't just that I believed that he was there in the Blessed Sacrament. It was as if he was sitting next to me. And not just sitting next to me, but embracing me. Holding me up. In my brokenness, in my doubts, looking at me with love, with mercy, and desiring in that brokenness to make me whole. I sat there, and the only words of prayer that came to my mind was, Lord, thank you for the honor and the blessing to serve. And just with those few words, sat before the Lord and with the Lord for I don't know how long. Tears of relief and tears of joy. And I know that it was real. It wasn't just a hope. It wasn't just my imagination, because it was transformative. And not only did I see that, but others saw it. I went on with the rest of my day. I went back up to the hospital. I was busy. I had the evening mass. And about 6:30, 7 o'clock, I was back in the rectory. I was kind of relaxing, sitting on the couch, and I get a phone call. It's a woman who lived next door to the church. She's very involved as a volunteer with the environments of the church, decorating the church. Worked with her quite a bit in the time that I was there. And she said, "What did you preach on today?" And I started to tell her kind of the outline that I had in my head. I don't write things out. You can see I don't have a whole lot of written notes here. I told her basically what I spoke on. And she goes, no. She says, I was at 11:15 Mass, and my husband and my son just came home from the evening Mass, and they said it was the best homily you'd ever given. She said, I was at 11:15. It was okay. She said, what'd you speak on? It wasn't different. At least the outline wasn't different. The story wasn't different. Something was different. I'd experienced that mercy and that love. I'd been embraced by that mercy and that love. I've been held up by that mercy and love. And having experienced it and knowing it, I often return to that moment in prayer. When I'm feeling distant from that, when I'm feeling doubtful, when I'm feeling that brokenness and feeling that need to reconnect, I try to remember and to go back there in prayer. Our memory is a great gift, and especially those memory of prayers, to take ourselves back to those moments that have been so significant, those moments of reconciliation when we have been forgiven, when we really sense that profound sense that we've been looked at with love and forgiveness. Because that's all the way that the Lord looks at us. You know, in Luke's gospel, when Peter denies Jesus, all four gospels tell us about the story of Peter's denial, but there's only one. Luke says that when the cock crowed, Jesus turned and looked at Peter. And I've often thought, how does the Lord look? Anger? Disappointment? I told you so. Last night, remember? Jesus, I believe, looked at Peter like he looks at us today. Like he looks at us always. No matter what our brokenness is, our sin has been, no matter the times that we have forgotten, he looks at us with complete love, complete mercy, and complete gift. It's important. Today is important. Important to remember that divine mercy so that we may never forget. God bless.